vamos a pasar a la última intervención para una perspectiva de Indonesia, Ghazali, por favor.
Good. Is it afternoon already? Yeah, probably. Yes, it is afternoon. Good afternoon. So I hope you all have a headset because my Spanish is as good as your English. So if you don't have any headsets on, please get one from the back. My name is Ghazali Ohorella. Contrary to what a lot of people think, that I'm from Indonesia, I am not from Indonesia. I'm from Maluku. If you don't know where Maluku is, we have 999 islands, right between Australia and the Philippines. And we have 2 million indigenous peoples living on our islands. And we used to be independent for a while, but we were colonized as well. But now we are occupied by Indonesia. So that's why when people say that I'm from Indonesia, then I will always feel that I have to correct people because I am not from Indonesia. I am from Maluku. Maluku, it's quite funny because it sounds almost the same as the venue that we are in. And having listened to the Latin American situation when it comes to NDCs and the situation of indigenous peoples in Latin America, I on purpose asked to speak very last. Why? Because I would like to help the situations by explaining what we can do at the pre-COP and at the COP to make states respect the rights of indigenous peoples and indigenous peoples. So that is why I'm last and why I'm here. Before I start, I have 2 questions. One, who is, but just by show of hands, who is indigenous in this room? Shall wait a little while for the translation to kick in. Okay. Okay, so that's the majority. So I will have to adjust my intervention a little bit, which is good. Which is good. The same people are. Do you know about the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples? Just a show of hands. Wow. Okay, so the percentage, it's roughly 80% of the people that were raising their hands that were indigenous did not know that that is a Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So I will explain that a little bit before I go into why indigenous people's rights and human rights are very important in the NDCs and how states can support indigenous peoples and how indigenous peoples, and in this, of course, also local communities as well, can influence the NDCs. And then finally, I will explain a little bit what we can do right now at the pre-COP and at COP25, because that is very important, because otherwise I can tell you a lot of things, but you are here, so you will have to do something, at least from my point of view. So, first of all, the indigenous rights. We all heard about human rights, which are mostly individual rights. So you as a person have a right to a nationality, a right to education, healthcare as an individual. The difference with indigenous rights is that these rights are mostly collective rights. So as a peoples, you have the right to self-determination, the right to have your own government, the right to have your own education, and the right of free, prior, and informed consent, which I will go into in a little bit. Why I'm here is actually because I am indigenous, and I have some experience in international advocacy at the United Nations, and what I would like to do is inspire and empower indigenous peoples to do the same. So that's why I would like to give you tools towards influencing the NDCs. So there are roughly 194 states that have provided NDCs, so nationally determined contributions, to fight climate change. Guess. So please guess, or tell me out loud, shout a number. How many states have included indigenous peoples or rights of indigenous peoples in their NDCs? Just shout a number. 24. So somebody said 24. Do you think higher, so point up or point low? Higher or lower? I see people higher. Okay. There's one gentleman in there in the back says lower. Sounds like an auction right now. It is actually 27. So out of the 194 states, only 27 states have included a reference indigenous peoples and indigenous peoples' rights in their NDCs. That is a laughable number. That is not a good number. If you also consider that a lot more states have indigenous peoples in their countries, a lot more states have adopted or voted in favor of the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that is a laughable number. That is pathetic. 127 against 194. So that is something that we as peoples should also raise awareness, that we are from Brazil, Ecuador, Guatemala, Chile, Costa Rica. If they have not included indigenous peoples in their NDCs, you're from that country, demand that they reflect the rights of indigenous peoples or indigenous peoples in their NDCs. And one of the most challenging thing is, and that we all need to keep in mind, that those NDCs, they all have to add up to something. It is not just a report of the current status of your state. No, there has to be some ambition. The ambition to stay well below 1.5. So the NDCs that those states have, they have to add up to that. They also have to add up to respecting the rights of indigenous peoples, respecting human rights. There are, indigenous people's rights is like a hot potato for a lot of states. They have indigenous peoples, but as soon as you start talking about indigenous people's rights, they are very, very careful, and they don't like to talk about that. But it's up to us to compel those states to include indigenous peoples and indigenous people's rights into the NDCs. And the funny thing is, but it's all, I'm saying funny, but it's actually tragic, is that most of these states, those 194 states that did the NDCs, they also signed on to human rights conventions. The right to Convention on Civil and Political Rights, Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. They signed on to those conventions, but once you talk about NDCs, they're not talking about those human rights obligations. So that is something that is very tragic when it comes to the NDCs. So how can states support indigenous peoples? And how can we influence the drafting of the NDCs? it was said before already, we have our own systems. We have our own methodologies. We have our own ways of sustainable development as Indigenous peoples. Currently, most initiatives that are out there are not building upon the Indigenous peoples. They're not building upon the initiatives of Indigenous peoples. What they do is like, here's a package, go play. But that's wrong. We, as well, I don't have to explain it to you, of course. We have been living in harmony with the planet since time immemorial. It's not in Ecuador, it's not only in Brazil, it's not only in Costa Rica, it's not only in Guatemala. All around the world, all Indigenous peoples have been living in harmony with the planet. We have our models, we have our governing systems, and it's all based on respecting the planet. And it's all based on consent. Basically, our love for the planet. And that is something that a lot of people, non-Indigenous peoples, have forgotten, and that we have to emphasize in our conversations with states. So how do you influence the NDCs? What we can do is provide guidance. There are roughly 3 stages of the NDCs. It's the preparatory stage, implementation stage, and the reporting stage. We as Indigenous peoples, it's one of the things that we can do. It's to build the capacities of not only states, but also NGOs, and also ourselves. I would like to give you 3 options of 3 ideas. One, Tuntak has already talked about it a little bit, is the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform on traditional knowledge. It's new. One of its functions is capacity building. Capacity building not only of Indigenous peoples to strengthen their knowledge, but also the capacities of states to strengthen their knowledge of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples' rights, and also to strengthen the knowledge between Indigenous peoples and states. So in between would be Indigenous peoples' rights, that they both know how to interact with each other. The second thing is a potential blueprint. Right now, the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, CL to the Center for International Center for Environmental Law, they're developing a blueprint for states as not as a checklist, but as a guidance of how to interact with Indigenous peoples and how to reference human rights in their NDCs. Most NDCs right now are written by consultants and not by governments. And so we have to educate those people that are drafting the NDCs by providing them guidance. For us, it is not good to point fingers. It is, for us, we have to come from a very positive point of view by saying that human rights and indigenous rights is something that adds up to climate action. That is a very fundamental part for to fighting climate change. And there's also the golden standard that has been drafted by the Global Landscapes Forum, and it's not only for states but also for private sector, making sure that they comply with the golden standard before they go into the lands of Indigenous peoples and before they impose any projects that quote unquote fights climate change but takes away our lands first before they do that. And so that's pretty much how states can help us and how we can influence the NDC process. So here's the thing. Currently, there's the Paris Rule Book that is still being, the Article 6 is still, quote unquote, open. In Article 6 is about NDCs. And the problem with that is that the reference to human rights is under attack. And it was under attack in Bonn last May at the UNFCCC Intersessionals. But they will have to decide upon it in Santiago de Chile. Once the Paris Rulebook is concluded, it will not be changed for the next 10 to 20 years. It is done. So we have a small time window between now, right now at the pre-COP, and the COP, to make sure that states support human rights and support the rights of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples in the Paris Rulebook, particularly Article 6. So I would, if you don't have to listen to whatever I say, but there's one thing that I would press upon you. Please talk to your states that they maintain language on human rights and Indigenous peoples in Article 6. So that's a little bit about NDCs. Thank you.
Excelente, muchas gracias.